I'll circulate the edited video as well. So I'm going to stop talking and hand over to Rachel to introduce themselves and their session today. So yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Phoebe. Hi, everyone. It's really great to meet you. Thank you so much for joining the session today. You join me. I'm based down in Poole in Dorset. Currently renting an office. I was explaining to Phoebe, I actually moved house on Friday, so it was a little bit chaotic at home. So I've decided to come to a separate office for a week. But it is a little bit echoey, so hopefully it's not too distracting. So yeah, my name's Rachel. I use she and they pronouns, and I have been what some traditionally call an HR consultant I've been in HR for over 25 years now, and set up on my own as a consultant about 5 years ago. And I have a real passion for inclusion and diversity in the workplace, for creating workplaces that people really want to be a part of, and challenging the sort of traditional way of doing things. I started my career in the corporate sector, but then happily was made redundant and decided, and now I work mainly in the charitable sector. And it's really great to have this opportunity to meet with all of you today. So we're going to be chatting about delivering effective feedback. Might even get an opportunity to practice some of that. We'll see how we get on. But I say accessibility is really important. So if there's anything that I need to be aware of to make this session more accessible, or if I need to slow down or anything, then please just let us know. Okay, let's start with the slides. So first of all, just a few rules. So first of all, hopefully all the sort of natural things that you'd expect. So just sort of respect for other people. People have different views when it comes to things like this. I think Phoebe's already said that the captions are on, so accessibility is really important. Interaction is great. It makes the session go really well, but obviously I appreciate that not everybody is comfortable doing that. So if you do want to join in, use the chat. Or if you want to say something, then if you can use the raise hand function on Zoom, that'd be really helpful, and then I'll come to people. But if you do use chat, just bear with me, because if I'm presenting, I can't always keep up with both, so bear with me. I think I said the slides will be shared following the session, but I believe that you have already had those sent through. So any questions before we start? Brilliant. So I think the first thing I probably want to say just about feedback in general is I always find it amazing, whatever workplace I go into, that it's always seen as such a, always seems to be seen as such a, it's always framed as a criticism, or people seem to be scared of feedback or having difficult conversations. And I can honestly say, in my over 25 years working in the traditional world of HR, the majority of difficult situations that I have to support and deal with often stems from someone not having a crucial conversation at some stage. And I would sort of view it like a train track, where as if two people are going along together and everything's working smoothly, then you've got this equidistant between you. But as soon as someone goes veering off path, the longer you take it, the longer you leave it before you have a conversation, the further apart, the bigger the tangent gets. And often what happens is I get called in when the tangent is this big, and it makes it a lot more difficult then to reel people back into where they should be. So yeah, having these early conversations is absolutely crucial. And actually the tool that I'll discuss today, which I've used to deliver feedback for years, is actually really useful, not just for delivering developmental feedback, but also it's really great to enhance how you give feedback where you're celebrating the success that somebody has done as well. The other thing, so just to sort of state why I call myself a people choreographer, I actually, until a year ago, like I said, I didn't have any dance experience, but last year I'm very proud to say that I was runner-up in the local Bournemouth business come dancing competition. So I now do have a small amount of dance experience, But the key thing was when I was setting up 5 years ago my own organisation, I really wanted to get away from traditional HR and being branded as a traditional HR consultant. I'm a huge fan of Strictly Come Dancing and musical theatre, and I thought, how is it that something like Strictly or organisations that put on shows can create something that celebrates people so well, and yet organisations can go through change programmes, sometimes spend an absolute fortune on them, and they don't really put people front and centre. They don't take people with them on the journey, and I think it is that it's the fact that you class it, you sort of call it training and giving feedback in those situations comes much more naturally. When I was learning to dance last year, I'm very, very grateful that my dance partner took the time to tell me where things were going well and where they weren't going well. But why is it in a traditional workplace that can be seen sometimes as something that's more challenging? So what we're going to look at today is understand why it's important that feedback matters. We're going to talk about barriers that you may have to giving effective feedback. And like I say, we're going to have a little practice using a tool that I use for having these clear conversations. So first of all, I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute, and I'm just going to invite you to either raise your hand and I'll invite you to speak, or put in the chat and just think about a piece of feedback or a recent conversation that went well or maybe not so well. So we'll be using that later. But first of all, to think, why is it that you think that giving feedback, what do you think the barriers are? Ben?
I think fear of it being received negatively.
Yes. And do you think that's a perception, or do you think what do you think leads to that perception?
Possibly lots of things. History, trauma,
Yeah.
things that have happened where people have heard things or misheard things, and then the minute that a feedback situation feels important, that trauma arises, because the idea of any important conversation, whether good or bad, can make one feel that it must be negative because it's important, rather than it could be positive because it's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. So things coming up in the chat. Yeah, worried about hurting someone's feelings. I think that's one of the key things. We generally, as people, we like to be nice to people, and I think there's always that concern. Often yet not the right time or place for people to listen properly. Hard to be honest. As a freelancer, definitely worried about losing work. Yeah, fear it might make the situation worse, particularly if it's not handled very well. Not knowing how to say something the right way in order for it to be heard and taken on board. Absolutely. And neurodiverse impact. Yes, Rupert. This is something that's coming up quite a lot, where people are rejection sensitive and really struggle to process in the way that other neurotypical individuals may do. So it means that handling feedback with some individuals is more challenging. But I think one of the things with that is, if you're managing people or teaching people, it's always great to ask people up front how they like to receive feedback. So you've covered a lot of the things. Oh, here we go. So not being fully aware of legal implications. As a small charity, you don't have HR expertise. Absolutely. And that it can be really scary, particularly if you have individuals who may have a protected characteristic and wondering if it's reasonable to say something. If for times like that, places like ACAS give really good advice. I'd always recommend checking in on ACAS's website or giving them a call, or obviously get in touch. That's the sort of thing I support on, and I also have other great HR colleagues that offer advice to small charities as well. But yeah, there's so many things. Fear of doing things incorrectly, fear of receiving the feedback and how it will be received, and those legal implications in case you say the wrong things and make things worse. So one of my top tips is to prepare, and we'll go through that shortly. Right, let's go back to the slides. So first of all, looking at why feedback matters, and going back to what I was saying before, I think if we think about it as rehearsal notes rather than criticism, if you were in a music or a dance situation, feedback is what polishes the routine so that the performance really shines. So I think it's trying to use that same analogy, whether you're teaching or in the workplace. Without it, I think it's mistakes repeat, and like I say, that tangent grows and grows. So what you sort of maybe started as a small thing can actually then become a big thing. And in the work context, this is something that come up quite a lot. So often I'll have people who'll contact me and they'll say they have an issue with somebody, and I'll give advice on how to handle it, and maybe, the sort of things to say, how to sort of put something in place to give support to the person. But going back to all of the things that you identified previously, that some people will just stop doing that. I'll think, well, maybe if I just cross my fingers and stick my head in the sand, things will just get better on their own. Newsflash, they rarely do. And then what happens is a few months later, the issues got worse and worse because you haven't had the conversation, or the conversation hasn't taken place. And then you go back to someone like myself and say, the situation's got out of hand, I need to do something. Often I need to get rid of this person. And I'll say, well, what happened previously? Did you start having those conversations? And often the answer is no. And then this is why HR people get such a bad rap, because it's like, well, the thing you need to do now is start from that place and start having these reasonable conversations and pointing out where people need to improve. And that's, in terms of from an employed point of view, that's what you need to do to demonstrate that you've acted as a reasonable employer. But just in general, whoever you're delivering feedback to, I think it's fair, and most people, in my experience, don't want to do a bad job. They really want to know they're doing a good job. So I think that's what's really important, to make sure that these things are shared. Obviously, it's important in a workplace setting or any other setting to really strengthen people's skills and build people's confidence, which is what a lot of people like to have. And also, if you sort of take the other side of feedback, if we're talking about positive feedback, it can really help people feel seen as well, when you've taken the time to deliver meaningful feedback where you've sort of really appreciating something positive that someone's done. And every good relationship starts with a bedrock of trust. Trust is so important. So having these honest conversations and really sort of building a relationship where you can be honest, really does help build that trust and strengthens that relationship. Seen something up in the chat. How to avoid it feeling like micromanaging. Yeah, so shortly we're going to come on to a tool that I recommend. So what I'll do is we'll use the tool, and then I'll check in on that question at the end. Remind me if I forget, and we'll see if that helps you feel like you're not micromanaging. And a lot of the thing is to take the person, to stop it being personal and make it about the action rather than the individual. We'll come on to that shortly. And just finally, actually, before I move on from this slide, there is a real link between well-being and giving effective feedback. I think not having clear messages really does can increase someone's stress and anxiety. So providing clarity can really help reduces that anxiety. So this is the model that I'm a fan of. I mean, there's always an acronym for everything. And this model I've used for a long time, and I still, even now, prepare for conversations using this model. Had to use it quite a lot with solicitors who have driven me to distraction in the last few weeks as I've been moving home. And it's actually to break down the conversation that you need to have and prepare in advance. Again, what I find is that a lot of people will spend a lot of time having the conversation in their head, or with others, rather than preparing and have it with the individual that actually needs to have that conversation with. I think practicing, you know, if you've got a trusted ally or a buddy or someone in the workplace that you can have those sort of conversations with, practice can be great. But one of the best things to do is to actually make some notes and write them down first. So a very small example of aid. So aid is, the A is action. So what actually happened, it'd be really specific. I is the impact, what effect it had. And then D is the desired outcome, or what you want someone to do differently. And using that as an acronym, preparing in that way, really can help you phrase these conversations. So we're going to do a little practice now. Don't worry, you don't have to say out your own example, but I'm just going to talk you through. So let me stop sharing for the moment. So I'm just gonna, like I say, don't worry, you don't have to share this. And hopefully you've all got something that you can either type with or write down. And what I'm going to do is just ask you, first of all, to think of an example of a conversation that you might have been putting off having. Or maybe one that you've had to have recently, and if you were going to prepare it for it differently. So this could be in the workplace, it could be I don't know, some poor customer service that you've had. But think about one thing where you think, oh, I really wish that, you know, that you're really considering, or you've had to have a difficult conversation. Has everyone got something in mind? I'm just going to look at that. Okay, thanks, Becky. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Like I said, these are just to write down and use for yourself. So first of all, we're really going to look at the A, the action side. So first of all, just write down exactly what it was that happened. And that's usually an action or a behaviour or an attitude that you've observed. Just be as specific as possible. And when you're being specific, think about things like when it happened. So again, be as day of the week, time if possible. Maybe think about where it happened. Maybe who else may have observed it. So hopefully now you've got a sort of depersonalized, but a real clear outline of what it is, the action. And now I'm going to move on to impact. And this is where we can really extrapolate out, because often it's not the action that's the issue, because the action can be different for anybody and depending on the individual and the circumstance. So we're going to really extrapolate out the impact. So what was the initial impact that action, behaviour or attitude had? Maybe think about the impact on others, whether that's clients, students, staff, volunteers. Potentially funders, supporters. Then maybe think about any potential financial impact. So was there a cost in terms of, it might be a resource cost, so whatever that was, had an impact on somebody being able to do something else. Or maybe if it's a workplace situation, it might be, you know, if that thing was left to go unchecked, it might have a reputational impact, which might affect future funding. And I mean, it can feel quite dramatic sometimes to really extrapolate things out, but this is where the real beauty of this model happens, and really sort of getting people to understand the impact that their actions can have. And then when you've got that, maybe include how it made you feel. And then hopefully then you've got a really clear understanding of the potential impact if this was to go be left unchecked. So then we'll move on to the D of the AID model, which is the desired outcome or do differently. And looking at, I don't know if anyone's heard of Brené Brown, but an author that I like, and she uses the phrase of paint a picture of what good looks like, which I really like. So really describe what the ideal outcome would be. People are still writing, I'll give you another 20 seconds. Okay, so in the space of, I think, hopefully less than 5 minutes, you've gone from having something in your head about a conversation that you want to have or you wish you'd had, and now you've got a structure in which you could approach that. Any comments in the chat, or does anyone want to raise their hand and make any comments about that process? Joe?
Hiya. Yeah, I was just thinking, in the section around impact, and you were suggesting maybe we could think about how it made us feel and sharing that back. But doesn't that sort of tip it over into a bit more of a subjective space rather than being objective about whatever the action was?
Yeah, which is why I said at the end is you could say how it made you feel, because it really does depend on what it is. I think there are times when it's absolutely appropriate. Say, for example, if you've been having, if it's say a performance issue with somebody and you've been having those conversations, it could be, you know, I feel disappointed because we've been having this conversation and it's happened again. So I think there are some cases when it would be appropriate to say how you felt, but absolutely in others, if you want to sort of remain completely objective, you may leave that bit out and put in more objective measures like impact on people, finance, reputation, that sort of thing. So that one is a bit of a judgment call. Thanks for pointing out. Anyone else have any comments? Kitty?
Hi. Yeah, I guess with mine, like a lot of the kind of like impact, it didn't necessarily end up having the worst case impact, but it was like it could have done.
Yeah.
And actually in this situation, when I did approach it with the person, they were like, yeah, but that didn't happen. So even though, like, you know, it wasn't good role modeling from their part, it was unsafe procedure that they were doing and stuff, but it's difficult because it's kind of like it's almost my anxiety was there of kind of thinking, but it could have led to that was really irresponsible. So that's kind of what's on my mind here with still coming, because that was the reaction that I got, that yeah, but the worst thing didn't happen, we still kept it under control. And I was like, oh, tricky.
Yeah, and that is really challenging because, again, one of the a standard reaction to people receiving sort of feedback when they feel they're being criticised is to be really defensive, and that is quite a classic reaction. And I think it is just, you know, as the person having that conversation, just to hold the line and be like, absolutely, we're really lucky on this occasion that didn't happen, but this is why I'm having the conversation now, because next time, you know, we might not be so lucky, or we might not catch it in time, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly this approach is something that I've been using with managers for a long time, and it's something that people generally find really effective when it comes to preparing for these conversations. And like I say, if you balance the time that it took to just go through, and I'm happy to share the questions with Phoebe, so you could just have it sort of like a little crib sheet in the future, and just taking a few minutes to prepare and go into that conversation should make you feel sort of a bit more confident in terms of facing it. And the other reason I quite like it is because it depersonalizes it. It's not saying, you know, you are this or you did that. It's about taking it, say, more away from the action. You're observing the action, but actually what you're doing is having a much deeper conversation about the impact. And so the process works exactly the same as well for delivering positive feedback. So I sort of use the example of a manager that I used to work with, really lovely lady, and she was always telling, you know, being really positive and great job, but actually sometimes I felt, I really want to develop, please give me something to work with. So that's one thing, but also I wanted to know what I was doing well. And again, if you take exactly the same model, so if someone's done something great and you say, you know, this is what I observed, your action, attitude or behavior, and then again talk about the impact. So again, the impact on others, the financial potential impact, resource, reputation, whatever it happens to be, they're much more likely to repeat the behavior than just, you know, well done for doing this. So really extrapolating out the impact is a great way for getting repeat behavior, and actually, again, making people feel seen and valued, that you've really taken on board what they've done. Any other comments on that before we move on? Catherine.
Hi everyone. Yeah, it was really interesting going through a conversation I haven't had yet, but actually the desired outcome was understanding what my strengths are, and from having feedback given to me. So it was very useful to figure that out at the end, that it was actually that I am in need of some feedback from my superiors to be able to deliver it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Like I say, it's I think that whole like nervousness around delivering feedback can put people off doing it. I was amazed. So I worked with a lot of organisations and put in place like their appraisal system, or, you know, lots of things like that. And it's really strange how a lot of senior managers feel like, oh, the staff aren't going to want it. And actually, when we survey, people are desperate. You know, people really want to know how well they're doing. So that's great. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Ben. Oh, you're still muted, Ben.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
In a recent survey that we did with 21 organisations, where we were asking quality assurance and challenge to developed, only 10% mentioned that they felt their managers had a lack of confidence in giving feedback effectively, and none mentioned a lack of skills, which, and I'd say anecdotally, that's quite an understatement. And I wonder how much there's a sense of that there is almost a denial in, I know, okay, so in the management tiers of, actually it is really hard and developing those skills are critical, and actually we need to put more time into that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. I think what I find, again, with a lot of organisations, is, well, actually, so I sort of do quite a lot of line management training, and I would say, look, being a line manager is literally one of the hardest jobs that you can do. It's often people find themselves being a line manager because they were technically really good at something. You know, you've got to the top of your game in whatever role it is. Great, now we're going to give you people to manage, as if it's easy, and it really isn't. It's really challenging, especially nowadays. We have such a multi-generational workforce that have such different expectations and experiences. So to be a manager, managing all of that, and all the extra compliance and everything else that goes on, it's really, really hard. So I think, first of all, I would say, if you're a line manager, give yourself a break, because it's not an easy job. But it's really, yeah, I never see enough training. It's almost like, you know, technically there you go, crack on, but not enough investment on actually how to be a really good line manager and deal with all those things like nervousness around how to manage people with protected characteristics, how to make sure we're doing, you know, what's a reasonable adjustment if somebody has something that needs an adjustment. It really is challenging. So, but I think the first step is recognising that, and recognising that it's hard. Sorry, Ben, go on.
And just to say, that's really brilliant to hear. One thing I found hard was being a middle manager, was that the managers above would want really strong outcomes from feedback. So they'd say, did you give them feedback? Has it changed? And I always think feedback loops are like evolving and changing. I'm not, I'd go back to another meeting and say, well, we had the chat, and then has it changed? Well, not yet, but maybe. Does that mean I'm failing, or is that just part of, you know? And I'm sure there's a slow, but I just wanted to shout that out, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, again, that's why being a middle manager is absolutely challenging, because you are stuck in the middle. You're there trying to absorb instructions from above and sometimes shield your team, or translate what can be quite direct objectives into what's going to work for my team. But I think the age model that we just used also works for managing up. You know, it can be you know, you've said that the impact of you saying that was this, actually much more helpful if you gave more time, were more specific, were more flexible, you know, whatever it happens to be. So, yeah, like I say, it's worked very well managing rather frustrating solicitors in the last few weeks. So, yeah, I'd recommend giving it some practice. And then just sort of coming on to Lydia's point that we made about avoiding micromanaging. Again, that's really challenging. So Lydia, did you want to expand a little bit?
Well, yes, that, and something else that you just brought up with the conversation between yourself and Ben, is that we've got quite a small charity and we are inclusive and diverse, and we do make reasonable adjustments because we have got people with neurodiversity. But what we've found is, by making those adjustments, because we are a small team in an open plan office, other people are seeing the adjustment and then feeling very upset because they're not getting the same adjustments, and then it can lead to people feeling really bad, and then they will use the crutch of, oh, but you're micromanaging me, you're doing this, and you're not allowing me to do that, but you're allowing somebody else to. So it's like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, it is really difficult. So I think for me, one of the things is to be really clear that that, you know, adjustments are available for anybody. You know, you want to work with everyone and get the best out of them. Has anyone heard of something called Manual of Me? Is that something at all? So, I mean, I can send the link, but you can just Google Manual of Me, and there's like a sort of a template available. And it's quite good, regardless if somebody has a protected characteristic, anybody. I think if you give everyone the opportunity to say, I work best when, whether that's time of day, the sort of office space they're in, you know, you might not get the best of me. Thank you, Phoebe. If you do that for everybody, and you make it really clear that everyone has the opportunity to have the sort of to work and get the best from them, and that will look different for different people. So it doesn't mean you have to disclose why someone's had an adjustment, because obviously that's confidential, and you know, it's not fair to share why somebody might need an adjustment. But by being really upfront that as an organisation you embrace supporting everyone as much as possible, and that looks different, then that should help manage that. It won't always, because people have different expectations and, you know, depending what's going on with people. But I would have sort of individual conversations that, you know, like monthly or regular one-to-ones with people are great opportunities for those conversations. And just say what's working for you and what's not working for you, and explaining that you're there, you know, to have an equitable organisation, not necessarily an equal one.
Yeah, I think some of my struggles have been actually other managers. So we've got sort of like multiple departments. So I'll make an adjustment in my area, and then I get the criticism from the other managers saying, you're making it really difficult for me to manage my person now. Which is, yeah. So for me, it's less about I'm on your wavelength in terms of everybody should have access and be able to be managed, but then you've got different management styles, and somebody is saying, well, no, in my department that just can't work, so I'm not going to do that. And then, yeah, that's the knock-on effect.
I know. The thing is, we're leading the revolution, Lydia, because you know, absolutely we can be inclusive and accessible to everybody. I think my favourite example of this, I started working, so I'm mainly charities, and I have the odd random organisation that I support, and I end up working with a manufacturing organisation just because I was recommended through someone. And we started having the conversation, they were losing staff, and I was like, you just need to be more flexible. We can't be flexible, you know, we run manufacturing, we have very set times. So we've worked with them over probably about 18 months. Guess what? They're now operating a 4-day week. And in the beginning, when I had this conversation that can't possibly ever happen, actually they're seeing it as an advantage. Their attendance has improved, their retention has improved, and actually they recognise the benefits of the fact that they don't have to heat their factory 5 days a week, they're only heating it 4 days a week. Everything has improved in terms of production, quality of output. And I mean, that's one sort of quite specific example, but I think it just shows that if you listen to people and listen to what it is that help people be their best self, and again, it is something I'm seeing quite a lot in organisations, that you've got you know, managers that get it and are absolutely doing the best that they can for people, and others that aren't quite on board. I guess all I can do is say, when you get the positive results, just shout about it. And also remind people that they do have a duty under the Equality Act as well, particularly if it's for somebody that's got a disability, that they need to be considering adjustments, and that needs to be consistently applied.
Yeah, I think we're working towards it.
Yeah, we'll say change takes time. Yes, 4-day week is definitely a dream, but it's happening. There is a 4-day week. I can't think what it's called, but yeah, there's actually you can follow it on LinkedIn and places like that. There's a lot more organisations are adopting it and seeing amazing improvements. Okay, let's go back to the slides. So we've talked through the aid model, and now just some sort of just a way of maybe phrasing things that are a bit more constructive. Like I say, I had my manager that used to say good job, and I'd be like, what was a good job? So, you know, be a bit more specific, talk about the impact. So rather than good job, you know, preparation meant that rehearsal ran much more smoothly, and then you could say which meant it was a better experience for everyone. Again, extrapolate it out. That wasn't great. What wasn't great? Again, be really clear and specific, and make sure that clarity is provided. Too quiet, not something that I've ever personally been told before, but you know, for individuals that are, you know, you may have individuals that are more introverted. Talk about, you know, how you want to hear more of their ideas. But again, with things like that, ask about how people like to be managed. I mean, this goes slightly off topic, but for meetings, make sure, you know, as youth music do, send agendas in advance, make sure people know if you're going to be checking in with them. So some examples here, which hopefully will be quite straightforward. So we've got a scenario where someone keeps arriving late to rehearsals. And if you use the chat, so which of these is the most effective feedback? So we've got A, you're always late, it's unprofessional. B, I noticed you've been late for the last 2 rehearsals. It meant we lost rehearsal time. In future, I'd like you to be ready to start on time. Or C, try to be on time, yeah. Answers in chat. Yay. And now hand on heart. I mean, that B is what we should do, but how often do we just do A or C? Yeah, Gillian, that's a really good point, actually, following up with questions if everything's okay. Which leads me to one of my favourite phrases, which is get curious before you get furious. So often we can jump to conclusions. One of the examples that I always remind on with this was a few years ago, I was working with a charity and there was a young person service that we'd set up on the coast. It had been really challenging. It was a place for young people to go when they were coming out of the care system. And we had big battles with the neighbours. They didn't want this place. We had real challenges staffing the service. But eventually we got this place set up and it was running. And then one weekend we came in and there had been some complaints from the neighbours because there was loads of rubbish around. And the manager, actually was chief exec, who was not known for being, who he definitely went full furious before anything else was considered. And he rang up and absolutely berated the service, and because obviously it had taken so long, and really sort of laid into them, and was sort of not very pleasant or professional. It actually resulted in one person who we'd really struggled to recruit leaving. And when we checked back, this place was on the coast where they have enormous seagulls. When they checked back on the CCTV, we actually found that the rubbish was caused because the seagulls had gone into the bin and they'd opened all the rubbish, and that's when there was rubbish strewn everywhere. But it was too late. The damage was done. The staff were annoyed. We actually lost a member of staff. So yeah, this is my little reminder to get curious first, because you never know, as you've said there, Gillian, what's happening with people, and there could be all sorts of reasons. I used to play a game with my daughter when we were young, if we were going along in the car, and we'd look at someone and say, right, what's that person's story? We'd make it as outlandish as possible and say, but the thing is, anything, we don't know, do we? Anything could be true. We just don't know. Any comments on that before we move on? Okay. I've got another scenario. So a colleague dominates every conversation, leaving others unheard. Again, A, B, or C. A, stop talking so much, you're hogging the conversation. B, in today's meeting, you spoke for most of the time. It meant others didn't share their ideas. Next time, I'd like you to pause so others can contribute. Or C, can you just let other people have a turn? Checking the chat, and I'm expecting to see all B's. Yes. Again, sometimes this would depend on the relationship you have with somebody. I think of, colleagues in the past that you got a good relationship with, you could potentially go with an A or a C, but in general, B is much more constructive. So thinking about, so we're just going into sort of questions now. So before we go into that, if you just maybe take a moment to think of one thing that you'll do differently, if anything, as a result of today's session. If you'd like to share in the chat, that would be great. Prepare. Yes, Catherine, thank you. like I said, it never fails to amaze me. But I can see managers going around and literally talking to everyone. You can't believe what's happened. This person's done this. This person's done that. And, you know, spend 2 days talking about how terrible it is instead of just 5 minutes preparing. So taking time to prepare, yes. And willing to listen to feedback yourself. Yeah, that's a great one, Rupert. I think that really does help. And again, going back to what we were saying about establishing trust, one of the best ways to be able to have this open conversation where you can share feedback yourself is being really willing to listen yourself. And when I used to manage people, one of the things I would always try to ask in my monthly one-to-ones is, what can I do better for you? Or is there anything, you know, about the way I manage you that could be improved? So yeah, make it two-way. Being very specific about what's actually happened. Yes, Becky, being really breaking it down. Gillian, gathering all the info and preparing. Yes, lots of preparing, hooray. Joe, keen to look at manual of me, see how might that help us all understand each other's feedback needs. Yeah, I say there's, you could do your own version for an organisation, but it is a really useful tool that I've seen organisations use really well. Lydia asked questions about how they would like feedback and prepare. Yes, and get curious. Any questions at all? Okay, I suppose, so just to round up then, I would say, if you do line manage people, remember it's a really difficult job. Don't beat yourself up about it. It is one of the most challenging things you can do. You know, if you need to have a difficult conversation, prepare, write it down. But if you feel that you need to sort of practice, you know, if you've got a safe person you can do that with, that's absolutely fine. Always think back to sort of being reasonable, you know, put yourself in someone's shoes. What's a reasonable way to approach? Ask people how they like to receive feedback. And yeah, practice, practice, practice.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm just going to pop a little evaluation survey. If everyone could complete that, that would be amazing. And also, we've got Rachel coming back next week to do a session on setting and maintaining boundaries. So I will put that in the chat as well, because that was really great. So thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah.
And if anybody, I'm on LinkedIn, if anybody wants to connect, more than happy to connect. So please get in touch. Rachel Atkinson, People Choreographer.